This incident occurred to a couple of friends of mine, and I will now read it as written. August 22nd, 1989. This happened the next night after we got married in the Yosemite Valley Chapel on the 21st. It was hot weather. It was about midnight when we decided to go swimming in the Merced River off the North Side Drive just east of Pohono Bridge. We stopped the car and parked to walk down to the river. There were no other cars in sight, or had been since we left the valley areas. We assumed we would be alone there. Now, as a side note, there are no time restrictions on visitors to the park, so you can be active 24 hours a day. Some people like to deer watch at night with no lights or flashlights, relying on their purple pigment to see in the dark, and are sometimes described as looking like zombies wandering the meadows at night. Although we were approximately 6 miles from the campgrounds, it is not unthinkable that people may have walked there in the night. So, to continue, we got out of the car, grabbed flashlights, towels, and a blanket, and proceeded down the dirt trail which goes to the river's edge, where there is a sandy area and you can swim there. I had been going to these places with my family throughout my life and was very familiar with the layout and the situation. I had not been there at midnight. From the car to the sand was maybe 30 yards through a wooded slope. We were part way down when I saw two men standing off the trail to my left, and I shined my light on them as I did not know what I was looking at in the dark. When I saw it was people, I quickly shined the light down and said sorry to them. They didn't move or say anything. So I thought, okay, I guess they are into the deer watching thing and are trying to be quiet. At least now I knew we were not alone, apparently. Another side note, all my life camping or hiking, when coming across strangers in the day or night, there is usually some sign of recognition or brief greeting as a courtesy. A head nod or a hey, how's it going is typical. With these guys, there was nothing. As I said, they didn't make a sound or move. They were tall and standing erect and side by side, and appeared to be wearing suits or formal clothes of some sort. This was apparent as I shined the light on them and also in their silhouettes. I did not see their faces. My wife did notice them as she was moving forward to the beach. When I got there behind her, she was spreading out the blanket and had sat down. I joined her. The river was there and was making noise, and the moonlight was coming through the trees. From the left, out of the trees, a couple emerged, and they were dressed in wedding clothes, like a bride and a groom. They came out and stood at the river's edge about 10 yards from us. I could hear them talking softly, but the river noise made it hard to make out what they were saying. The moonlight shone on them. After a few moments, they turned more toward us and appeared to be looking our way, or maybe watching us. To me, they seemed to be talking about us, but maybe I was being paranoid simply because they were facing us and not talking to us. I am becoming nervous as I do not quite understand the situation that is taking place. I looked behind us and could see the two black figures not far behind us near the trail. As I looked back around us, I now saw a figure come out of the woods on the right of us and walk out onto a rock that jutted into the river. He was acting or moving like an ape man, slumped over and waving his arms and crouching down menacingly. Very odd, I thought to myself. Why is he doing that? Where did all these people come from? At this point, I was getting agitated and nervous as I was feeling surrounded, in essence. My wife seemed okay and not particularly bothered, although she admitted our swim was probably off. We both assumed they must have been there already and we must have interrupted them. So it's been a few minutes, and my wife says she left the cigarettes in the car and would I get them? I was startled in my reaction and was obviously not excited to go back to the car at that moment. Yes, I was feeling scared and worried about this scene. Something did not feel right, and I felt we were vulnerable. She thought I was acting weird and did not understand my concerns, so I stood up, huffy like, and resolved to go to the car for the damn cigarettes. I walked past them all and made it to the car and got the stuff, and while I was at it, opened the trunk and retrieved my sword I had there. I made a purposeful noise of banging it on the bumper when I shut the trunk. I came back and drew the sword and stuck it in the ground where we were sitting. She was concerned and asked me what I was doing. I said something rather loudly to the effect of, "Well, when people sneak up on you and won't talk to you in a strange place at night, I want them to know I may kill them if they try anything." I was not even sure why I said something so aggressive, but as I said, I was scared by then. She was shocked by that and later expressed that she was worried she had just married a crazy guy. A few more minutes and we decided to leave. We grabbed our stuff and without event got in the car and drove further down the road, again seeing no other vehicles or lights. The road around Yosemite Park is a one-way loop, so cars have to go out of the park on the side we were on, unless you drive across that same bridge and head back to the campgrounds. We drove past the bridge and headed down El Portal Road, which is now two-way, heading for Cascades Picnic Area, where I also had spent a lot of time as a kid with my family, swimming there at another beach. I thought for sure this place would be empty at night, as it was another 7 miles further from the bridge and 12 miles from the campgrounds. So we get there, and the parking lot has no cars, but as we turn into park, the lights shine on a picnic table with folks sitting at it in the dark. My wife and I both saw this. We decided to head to the beach anyway and just mind our business. We got our stuff, and no, I left the sword in the car this time and started walking the trail through the woods to the river. This is about 100 yards maybe. The trail is wide and we could see it easily in the moonlight. Ahead next to the trail, I saw a woman standing there. She was wearing a white gown-like dress. She was maybe 40 yards up from me. We walked in silence at this point, as my wife didn't want to agitate me and I was feeling weird from the last place. As I approached the woman, her details became more apparent. I was also anticipating encountering her, and my tension built the closer I got. Why was she just standing there? The closer I got, I could see that she was pretty but old, with a pleasant and placid smile on her face. She had a veil, and the dress was old and very ornate and covered with lace and pearls. She was also glowing blue-white. Her skin was the same color. My hair stood on end as I neared her, and I was scared as to what to say to her when I was obviously going to walk right past her within touching range. My wife did not seem concerned, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Finally, when right next to her, I looked her in the eyes and managed to say hello. She kept smiling and watched me pass, but did not say anything. A few steps later, my wife says to me, "Why did you say hello to a tree?" I quickly looked back and literally jumped when I saw it was a stump of a dead tree. It was glowing white where the moonlight was on it. Now, I didn't know what to think. Was I losing my mind? I know what I saw was that woman, but obviously now I was wrong, so I felt silly and befuddled at my mistake. I told my wife I thought it was a woman in a white dress. She looked at me skeptically. We walked on, now just past halfway to the river. In a little ways, I saw black figures standing in the woods off the trail to the sides. I did not shine the light on them this time, and I also asked my wife if she saw them. She said no, and why was I seeing things? Now, I was starting to feel defensive and getting a bit mad. I was so sure I was seeing these things. Now, I was convinced it was due to reading maybe Carlos Castaneda books, and I was becoming aware of things one does not normally see. I felt I was in a mental state where these beings were visible to me, and I should be very careful. I do not prescribe to the idea there can be beings we are not aware of in our modern lives. Okay, past the figures and on to the trees at the edge of the riverbank. Here there is an elevation of about 15 feet above and overlooking the river and some exposed tree roots. You have to turn left and walk down to the level of the river, and there is a sandy area there. I stopped at the top of the high point and looked down. There I saw two figures at a downed tree in the river engaged in some activity. I don't know what, maybe fishing at 1 a.m.? I mean, I guess so, right? I see one guy has a red glowing thing on his face. Maybe a lit cigarette? Again, I say something to my wife, something like I see people in the dark. And she says, a little irritated, that she sees nothing. Now I get impatient with her as I am scared again and blurt out, "Oh yeah? Then what the fuck is that?" And then I turn my big flashlight right on the figures below. I think we both jumped at what we saw, although we may not have seen quite the same thing. It's open to interpretation, but the figures turned quickly and glared at us, and I felt a sense of immediate danger or possible attack. They were biped, but bulky and black and quick in their actions. When their heads turned, we literally jumped with surprise and were immediately afraid. And my wife grabbed me, saying, "What are those things? Let's go." She later told me when it looked at her, its head twisted around like a snake, and it was very unnatural. Whatever they were not human. I do not know what they were, but they had the ability to project hostility that was palpable. We turned quickly and started back to the car, but it was 100 yards away, and having to pass those shadow figures. She was holding on to me, and we were both feeling panic, but I remember telling her, "Whatever you do, don't run or they will have us. Keep our fear in control and just walk very fast." I was thinking that you shouldn't run from a predator unless it starts to chase you. When we neared the car, the picnic table with the people was not there at all. There was a table a ways away at the opposite side, but it was empty. What the hell? We got in the car and quickly drove away. Now, she admitted she was getting freaked out by my behavior up to then, but after seeing the guys at the river, she now thought what I was seeing must have been true, and she was just not tuned into it. We drove back toward the valley a few miles until we came to the turnoff that leads up the mountain away from the valley towards Tuolumne Meadows, another campground where my family spent a lot of time. As we drove, we compared notes and confirmed yes, we had both seen the figures at the first place: the bride, the groom, two shadowy men, and the animal guy, as we called him. We also spoke of the events at the second spot. We drove about 30 minutes, again not seeing any cars or lights at all, until coming to a viewpoint that overlooks the valley, so we decided to pull in and take a break. As soon as I turned the car into the parking area, we saw rather obviously with the headlights on them, they were all there, waiting and looking towards us. A bride, a groom, two shadow men, and the animal guy. They were standing in the same relative positions and maybe 15 feet into the viewpoint area. We both exclaimed in shock, and I said, "Do you see them?" She said yes, and she was as upset as I was. We did not turn off the car, but just backed out and continued on. Now our fear and excitement were really elevated, and we quickly made sure we agreed as to what we saw and speculated how impossible that should have been. There had been no vehicles in sight, so how did they get there before us? Are they people? What could do that? Still heading towards Tuolumne, maybe about another 45 minutes driving. Again, no vehicles in sight. It was now getting into the 2 to 3 a.m. time range. When we see a ranger type cabin or some typical forestry park buildings on the side of the road and some sort of park use only area. The cabin had a porch with a light on in front, and standing there was a bride, a groom, two shadow men, and the animal guy. We couldn't believe it. That could not be in a rational world. How were they getting there ahead of us? And how did they know where we were going? To this day, it still makes no sense. So it took us a couple hours to get to the campground, and I can say that we saw a lot of weird shadow play in the woods we passed, but we were willing to admit that this may have been due to just being scared. No way to know if it was real anymore. The last verifiable, at least to me, strange event was when we got to Lake Tenaya, a few miles from our destination, and parked in the lot there to rest up and maybe take a nap. The area here was clear, and the moon was making plenty of light, and we were not near any trees. Across the highway, there is a cut for the road and a steep incline to a ridge right there. This is not normally where someone would go, as it is steep and rocky and just a cutout for the road. But as we sat there in the car and I was watching that area, a dark figure guy climbs partway down the cut and sits back against the rocks to watch us. He has a red light or cigarette in his face. I got goosebumps as I watched him, and the fear started to come back. Why the hell would a guy be there doing that? So we just sat there and ignored him this time, and after a while drove off again and made it to the camp store outside Tuolumne Meadows campground. When we pulled up there, it was barely getting light now, and you could see figures sitting with their backs against the walls outside the store. And you know what? They were quite obviously normal human backpackers that had waited there overnight. We had not seen people in hours, and I felt joy and relief to see how obvious real people looked. We were finally safe and away from those shadowy people that haunted us all night since we first encountered them back at the river hours ago. That is the end of the strange events of the first day of our honeymoon. I cannot explain it and have not found any similar stories or ideas about it in the decades since then. Lots of ideas have been suggested: residual hauntings, ghosts, fairy folk, witches, skinwalkers, aliens, but none of it quite fit, it seems. At the time, we were so freaked out and it seemed so dramatic, but as the years have passed and looking back, at some point I had to admit that really nothing bad happened to us. We were not hurt or actually attacked, but they just showed themselves to us again and again, and we let the fear take hold. Maybe I insulted them with my sword and aggression, and they wanted to play us a bit. I cannot say. I can also say that as strange and scary as it was, we are glad to have had this happen, as life needs some unexplained to keep it interesting. I frequently ask people if they have ever had something they cannot explain happen to them, and on occasions I hear some weird